Well, welcome back to the Briancrombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our guest tonight is Rebecca Rosenblat, who is a registered psychotherapist, a media personality, a sex therapist, etc. And we're going to end the show with 10 commandments for constructive discussions. Rebecca, you've got 10 commandments for constructive discussions?
Absolutely, and always.
Fantastic. Well, let's hear what they are. Number one.
So number one is stick to only one topic at a time. People often will bring unrelated things or past things, hurts. They'll say, okay, now I got your attention. They bring everything into it. As soon as you do that, it becomes unwieldy. The other thing to keep in mind is along the same lines is don't present your inferences, conclusions, fears as factual. Because as soon as you do that, the other party is going to think that you're crazy because you're not necessarily matching the facts, and they'll stop listening to you.
Okay. Number two.
Number two, address the problem versus attacking the person. When we attack someone, it's wired in us to fight back. So if you don't want them to fight back, then just stick with the problem without attacking the person.
So number one is stick to only one topic at a time. Don't bring in old or unrelated stuff. And number two is address the problem versus attacking the person. Excellent. Mm-hmm. Number three.
Number three is best way to conduct any kind of a healthy conversation is a three-step approach. So it's mirror, validate, and empathize. So what you want to do is when somebody says something, you want to say it back to them exactly the way it was said. Don't change it, but exactly the way it was said. And you check in with them, am I right? And they'll say, yes. And they'll be quite surprised because they were expecting you to rebut. They were expecting you to argue with them, but you've just basically said what they said. So you've shown them, you've heard them. This is mirroring. Validating is, I get why you might feel that way. Doesn't mean you agree with them. You're just saying, I get why you might feel that way. And empathy is you put yourself in their shoes and you think of how they must be feeling. So it's you move from the why to the how they must be feeling. So what that looks like is, let's say you say to me, you make all the decisions around here. So even though it's a good idea for you to say, I feel, but let's say you've said, you make all the decisions around here. So what I would say is, what I hear you saying is you think that I make all the decisions around here. Am I right? You'll say yes. And immediately you'll soften up. I'll say, well, I get why you might feel that way. I understand why you might feel that way. And this is not where you say, I'm sorry you feel that way, because that's not validation at all. Most people go to that. So then you validate it. And the final thing would be, that must be very frustrating for you, because I've put myself in your shoes and I'm thinking, if I felt that you made all the decisions, I would find it very frustrating. Or maybe based on your personality, I might say it might be hurtful. So I've just kind of reiterated that, how you must be feeling based on your personality. It's a very intimate conversation. We like to be heard at the end of the day, even if there isn't a solution, because let's face it, 2/3 of arguments will never be resolved. We just want to be heard.
We just want to be heard. Mirror, validate, and empathize. Excellent. Number four.
Number four is follow the initiator inquire model. So the person who initiates has to start off with I messages. I feel, I think, not you always, you never. You never start with a you or an absolute. And then you just clearly state what you're feeling. Without assigning any blame. You have to be clear and there's no blame. Then the person who's receiving it, so this would be the inquirer, they pay attention, they ask questions if need be, and they kind of take that in and they make sure that they cater to the person's feelings. So what this does is it makes it very clean. Otherwise we can get to the, well, I have feelings too. What about my feelings? And it goes all over the place. It just spirals out of control. This way we keep track of the person who started it. Other parties' feelings are important. You obviously you respect them and you take care of them, but you don't go off on tangents when the other party says, well, what about my feelings? So you're kind of sticking to a very specific way of doing it.
Okay, excellent. Number five.
If you're flooding, so racing heart, flushed cheeks, hands or feet are getting clammy or tingly because you're getting ready for fight or flight, your gut is turning, any of that stuff, it means you're flooding. Time to put on the brakes on the conversation right away. It's not going to go to a good place. And we've talked in one of the previous sections that it's really, really important to park it somewhere at that time. Because if you just say, that's it, we have to take a break, and you don't park it somewhere exactly when you'll come back to it, it's very frustrating for the other party. It's like, okay, that's it. We'll never get back to it. Ideally, not faster than 20 minutes or longer than 24 hours. So park it where you think you'll have a good amount of time. And this is also true if the conversation has gone on for more than 20 minutes, because we start to loop at that time and we start to get kind of heated up a little bit. So if that's happened, saying, okay, you know what, it seems like we're starting to go around in circles. Why don't we take a bit of a break and think about each other's feelings and what each other's expressed and come back to it in a couple of hours?
I find this is one of the things that is the hardest, is to either park it and or stop after 20 minutes. People want to talk it out, and it goes on and on forever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very true. It's funny when I teach couples in particular. I mean, bosses and employees can use it as well. But when I teach couples, one of them is always tracking the person that wants it to be, or they'll say, the therapist said, or Rebecca said, 20 minutes. We got to stop. It's 20 minutes now. And I'm thinking, gee, thanks. Bring me right into the middle of it, but it's okay. I don't mind. So one party or the other that's feeling defeated does want to break. And generally, it's the male who wants to break first, because men are goal-oriented and there's no purpose. They're saying, we're just going round and round.
We're going round and round in circles, no question.
Yeah, round and round in circles.
Okay, so number one, stick to only one topic at a time and do not bring old or unrelated stuff. Number two is address the problem versus attacking the person. Number three is using this three-step approach of mirror, validate, and empathize. Number four is this interesting sort of the initiator inquirer model, where really what it I think talks about is being an active listener. You really have to listen to the other person and understand what they're saying. And number five is if you're flooding, where you're getting really physically, emotionally involved in the problem, stop, take a break, park it for 20 minutes to a day. And if you loop, such that you're going on and on and on after 20 minutes. Similarly, park it for a while and come back to it later. Sounds great. Okay, what's number 6?
Agree to disagree if need be, without destroying each other. We've talked about Dr. Gottman's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So that's contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Once they come into the picture, because the deeper we go into it, the greater the likelihood that those will show up. And those are just lethal weapons. I don't care how great your relationship is. Once those come in, it's going to destroy the relationship. And Dr. Gottman says, within 5 years from when these tools or lethal weapons, I should say, start to come into play, couple will split up. But sadly, most couples don't see a therapist until 6 years after they go to that place.
Oh, really? That's interesting. So that the 4 terrible things are defensiveness, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's number 7?
Number 7 is stick to the facts without adding meaning. Our emotions tend to italicize everything, and everything seems a lot worse than it is. We should treat them as a warning system. So the fire alarm is not the fire. Just keep that in mind.
The fire alarm is not the fire. Okay, that's a good analogy. I like that. Okay, mm-hmm. Number 8.
Keep your tone in check. The louder you get, the greater the likelihood that the other party is just not going to hear you. They're going to shut down, and also they will become flooded. So I always tell people, turn to whispers. You can say a lot of nasty stuff in whispers, but if you're in whispers, you're not going to flood, and the other party won't have to talk on top of you. But if you want the other party to stop listening, get louder and louder and louder.
You know, that's interesting. I used to work with a guy in big divisional meetings we had. He would talk very quietly. And he said, as soon as you start talking very quietly, everyone pays attention so much more. And if you're talking loudly, they turn their ears off.
But don't be so soft. I don't know if you saw the Seinfeld episode where this girl was whispering so softly that Jerry Seinfeld agrees to do something that he would not have normally agreed to. So soft, but not so quiet that people don't hear you altogether.
Okay, so number 6 is agree to disagree without destroying each other. Especially stay away from defensiveness, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling. Number 7 is stick to the facts without adding extra meaning. And number 8 is keep your tone in check. 2 more. What's number 9?
Number 9, focus on being influenced by the other party instead of trying to influence them. What this means is open up your heart and try to hear what the other party is saying. You might learn a lot of important stuff. A good salesman will never even begin their pitch until they find out what the objections might be. And then when they pitch, they address all the objections and they say, let's close the deal. Ditto for lawyers. They will not ask a question that they don't know the answer to. And you can only do that if if you gain an understanding into the other party. That's the only way of doing it. So I strongly recommend that people pay attention. We know what we're thinking. We need to know what the other party is thinking if we are to reach them.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of your points here talk about really active listening, like really listening to and understanding and empathizing with what the other person has to say. So number 9 is focus on being influenced by the other party instead of trying to influence them. Number 10, what's the last of the 10?
So the last one is don't lose sight of the goal of the conversation. People often get so caught up in making their points, decimating the other person, proving the other party wrong, that they lose sight of the goal. And things go off the rails very, very quickly when we lose sight of the goal, whatever that goal might be. And this is why if you go there, people often forget what they were fighting about, but then they have a fight about the fight. You know, what went down during the fight. I'll have people that'll say, we had this terrible fight last weekend, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, this party insulted me. They were name calling. They criticized me. They made me feel small. So what were you fighting about? And half the time they don't even remember what they were fighting about, because we only remember that which is emotionally charged. So you may not remember what you wore yesterday or what you ate a couple of days ago, but you are going to remember distinctly when something emotional happened to you, where you were standing, exactly what was said, how you felt in your body. So if the emotions are really, really amped up and the actual goal didn't even come up in the picture, then you're going to take your eyes off the ball and you will never get there. Just you'll fight about the fight.
Fantastic. So these are the 10 commandments for constructive discussions by Rebecca Rosenblat. Number 1, stick to only one topic at a time and do not bring up old or unrelated stuff. Number 2, address the problem versus attacking the person. Number 3, the best way to conduct a healthy conversation is by using the 3-step approach: mirror, validate, and empathize. Number 4, follow the initiator, inquire model, where you really are actively listening to the person on the other side. Number 5 is if you're flooding, take a break. Park it. And if you're looping, going longer than 20 minutes, similarly, take a break and park it for a while. Number 6, agree to disagree without destroying each other. Especially stay away from these 4 things that she keeps on mentioning, which is defensiveness, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling. Number 7, stick to the facts without adding meaning. Number 8, keep your tone in check. Don't speak too loud. Don't yell. Don't scream. Number 9, focus on being influenced by the other party instead of trying to influence them. And number 10, don't lose sight of the goal of the conversation, which is probably that you want to keep your relationship together and solve things rather than just winning the fight. Rebecca Rosenblat, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Remind us of the website we go to if we want to check out some of your other good writings and videos.
Talkwithrebecca.com, and for videos, you just go to YouTube.
Rebecca Rosenblat. Registered psychotherapist, a sex therapist, a therapist for individuals and couples, a media personality, and a wonderful person who's shared with us lots of interesting secrets. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well,
Give me 1 second.
Well, that's our show for tonight, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. It is Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour at Saga 960. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. Good night.